Welcome to Four Corners. Tonight we take you on a journey into remote Australia to reveal the scandalous misuse of taxpayers' money supposed to be benefiting our most disadvantaged communities. For decades, billions of dollars have been poured into services to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians. But as this story reveals, a shocking amount of that money is being lost through mismanagement, incompetence and, in some cases, fraud. Four Corners has learnt there are currently dozens of Aboriginal organisations and programs across the country under investigation by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the primary agency responsible for Indigenous funding. As usual in election campaigns, Indigenous Australia is receiving little attention. Tonight, we turn the spotlight on this neglected issue. Our reporter, Linton Besser, travelled thousands of kilometres from the Kimberley in Western Australia to the Northern Territory to bring you this story.
It's 5:30 in the morning in Broome, Western Australia. Mick Albert is off to a sports carnival in one of the most remote corners of the planet. He runs Gandua Amborni Wernan, an organisation that spots talent for major sporting leagues and mentors Indigenous kids.
It's going to be schoolwork, good behaviour, things like education and attendance.
Oh, that's good. So most of the boys keep up with those rules?
Yeah. Most of the boys.
How much better?
Gandua provides footballs, uniforms and umpires, like these two, in local communities like One Arm Point in the Kimberley.
All the kids would have their AFL role models and those sorts of things, but more importantly, they need those local community role models.
Well done, good work, boys.
And while those two young blokes are still only practically kids at the moment, the younger kids will always look up to those sorts of blokes and think, well, you know, they're staying at school, they're helping, you know, Mick and the guys out at Gandua. You know, maybe that's something I should do as well when I get a bit older.
Some of these children face challenges most of Australia can only imagine.
The home life may be such that it's not safe for them, you know. They might be coming out of a home life that's, you know, where it's family violence, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is that's, you know, going on in a young person's life in the home environment that they come from. These are some of the burdens that our young people are challenged with and how to deal with that.
Go, Kiffy, go!
Over the past year, the organisation has been rocked by the discovery that government funding meant to be going to help these kids had disappeared.
What do you need to do, boys? What do you need to get?
Get the ball, get the ball.
Get the footy. Get after the ball.
How could this happen? And why did it happen?
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
We bust ass to try and improve the lives of Aboriginal people, and there's this despicable act going on, and it was just absolutely gutting.
Early last year, Gandua chairwoman Marmanji Hand was called to an urgent meeting by the corporation's auditor.
Our auditor rang me and said, I need to get myself to Perth as soon as possible because she said that Gandua may be in trouble. She told us that a fraud may have occurred.
The target of the auditor's investigation was the CEO, Alan Bishop. An experienced AFL administrator, he had run the organisation for 19 years. It's now claimed that Alan Bishop had been plundering Gandua's funds for his own financial benefit.
All the board of directors felt that we were untouchable to those sort of things.
Tell me about the kind of volume of money that we're talking about.
Well, according to our auditor, about $300,000.
The organisation sued Alan Bishop for misappropriation and he was ordered to repay $324,000.
Was that money that Gandua could afford to just throw away?
No way. Nobody can afford to throw away that much. And, you know, the you know, while we still maintain program delivery, things have been really tight. And, you know, it's not worth pretending, but, you know, the last 12 months has been a massive challenge for the organisation.
3 weeks ago, Alan Bishop was charged with dishonestly misusing his position to transfer corporation funds into his own bank accounts. Four Corners traced him to his mansion in the beachside Perth suburb of Sorrento.
G'day, Alan. Linton Besser from Four Corners. Just like to ask you a couple of questions about what happened to Gandua and that $300,000.
I don't think this is time to talk without a solicitor, OK?
I'm just wondering, are you intending payment?
Yes, I am.
And when will that happen?
It's being sorted out now.
Alan Bishop is alleged to have created false records to generate 38 cheques worth a total of $237,000 for his own benefit.
It really hurt that someone can take money away, really, when that, you know, those were money that was going towards our kids in the Kimberley in regards to whatever, you know, support that they needed out in those communities.
It's not just Gandua. All over Australia, dozens of organisations are being exploited and betrayed. Four Corners has learned that 44 Indigenous organisations and programs around the country are currently under investigation by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet for misuse and waste of funds. The tragedy is this is money that cannot afford to be squandered.
Most communities and most of Aboriginal organisations are doing a fabulous job under really tough circumstances, dealing with the most complex issues of all organisations, trying to correct or close the gap on so many different sort of social issues. Unfortunately, there are pockets where exploitation has taken place, people have come in and done the wrong thing, and the community and the ones who suffer.
You go into some of these communities and you see people living in abject poverty, and you know that they have a trust fund or they have an organisation that has millions of dollars, which is their money, that they're looking after that community, and yet you're not seeing it getting in down to the ground.
We're on a journey of more than 4,000 kilometres across the country. It doesn't take us long to come across another case. This time it's at Fitzroy Crossing, a town of 1,200 people in the middle of the Kimberley, battling chronic alcohol abuse and shocking rates of youth suicide.
We're still in poverty, I can say that today. We're still screaming out for help. We're still looking for this financial support for the communities. We're wanting to try and even get playground equipment, get it out in the community. We can't even get that. I have tears sometimes when I do talk about the community.
Lynette Shaw is a board director of Aboriginal corporation Marra, whose charter is to alleviate poverty, sickness and suffering. Last year it received more than $14 million in taxpayer funding to deliver a range of services from housing to financial counselling.
The scale of these operations can contribute to alleviating welfare and poverty in our communities.
But Joe Ross, a former director, says not enough of this money is reaching the ground.
And here we are in a situation in a remote area like Fitzroy Crossing, the Fitzroy Valley of 3,500 people, and it has this wonderful, wonderful economic enterprise, but there's no money coming out of the enterprise.
The organisation's enormous contracts with the WA government have brought millions of taxpayer dollars to Marra and also to its joint venture partner, Perth businessman Gary Johnson.
Electrician by trade he was, that he started up an electrician shop, and he started working in with the people and then, created his own business. That's how I got to know him when I got on board.
No one can question Gary's business capacity and his ability to run a business, I think where the challenge has been in the last couple of years is the crossover between distributing and giving the benefits of that business back to the community.
Has it been a profitable arrangement for Gary?
My understanding it's been very profitable.
Gary Johnson has a consultancy agreement with Marra Warra Warra to run its businesses. It has proven highly lucrative for him. It gives him 50% of all profits, 50% of all sales of assets, and 5% of all turnover. In 2013, Gary Johnson was paid $6.6 million in management fees and profits.
I've seen the last page of this, and I've seen some of the people that I know signed this, and I said, did they understand the document before they signed it, what they were going into at that time?
The agreement was signed by 2 directors. Lynette Shaw says one of them is financially illiterate.
Do you think he understood what he was signing?
No, I don't think so.
This is a document written from Gary's side. When I said he earned, say, $6 million in 2013, you've got to take into account all the success fees and the incentives he's got in this contract. This, in anybody's mind, is an unconscionable contract.
In the event of a dispute, the contract says the parties agree that the determination of Gary James Johnson on any such issue shall be final and binding on all parties.
This is an unconscionable contract, and the poor directors at the time wouldn't have had any clue about the ramifications and the implications of what the community was losing in economic benefits from the contract.
And in control over their own future?
In control of their own future. This is a control freak's dream contract.
Gary Johnson's relationship with Marra Warra Warra has helped him cement a place in Perth's Millionaires Row. He's in the middle of drawing up plans to remodel his $5.3 million Peppermint Grove mansion. Gary Johnson hadn't responded to our requests for an interview, but we found him by chance at Broome Airport waiting for a flight.
Hello, Gary. It's Linton Besser from Four Corners. I'm on the phone with Mother.
How are you?
He said he was on the phone to his mother and was too busy to talk.
Gary, can you just give me 1 minute on the phone? Just 1 minute, because I've been trying to call you all day and I came to visit you.
Gary's flight to Perth was boarding in a few minutes, but he led us on a goose chase in and out of the airport.
Gary, can you just answer a couple of quick questions? I know, but just can you answer a couple of quick questions? Because you've obviously made a lot of money off Marra Warra Warra, and we're trying to understand your consultancy agreement. Can you just answer a couple of questions for Four Corners, please?
He was so eager to avoid our questions about his contract, he abandoned his flight.
Virgin Australia is paging guest Gary Johnson. Could you please make your way to gate number 2 for boarding?
Gary Johnson later sent us a statement saying the contract was willingly entered into by both parties and was normal commercial practice. Kilometres on from Fitzroy Crossing, we come to the town of Warman, population 500, in the spectacular East Kimberley. The organisation that runs Warman provides basic services like roads, health programs and aged care. We're welcomed in a smoking ceremony to protect us from bad spirits.
Was talking to our old people, ancestors, and look after your mom now, get your country. Yeah, that's what we were saying today in the smoke. Talking about to keep your mom safe, keep your mom strong.
Here at Warman, they've had more than their fair share of misfortune. What's happened here is another shocking case of an Aboriginal community coldly betrayed, this time after a major natural disaster. In March 2011, the town of Warman was washed away in a huge flood. Hundreds of people were evacuated.
The water came through the whole community, even our shop, our school. And it just, I can't find the words to explain how we felt that day.
Three-quarters of the houses here were destroyed. Vanessa Thomas was one of many who lost her home.
It took 45 minutes for my house to go under, so I left my dog, my car, and all my personal stuff. My life was back home. So I just went with the clothes I had on, because I put, we had to get the old people out first. I didn't feel sad at that time until the next day. We went home and I seen my house and my dog laying on the ground. And that was, I had nothing.
The state government declared an emergency and set up a task force to rebuild the town.
There was a project owner, I think is the term they used. He was put in charge the day-to-day, the running of the rebuild of the community. He was the go-to person in the community for contractors and everybody else that was rebuilding the whole place.
He came in we knew him as a housing guy.
A Department of Housing guy?
Department of Housing, yeah.
His name was Craig Dale, and he became a fixture in the community.
He spoke to us the way we wanted to hear things. The whole community was a construction site. We had 100 things going on, but this one man, he was the light in the 100 things we had to do. Garniwa lalangaran, garniwa lalangaran, nginginya, nginginya.
With more than 50 homes rebuilt and new community buildings like the school, Warman at last began to feel as though it was getting back on its feet. But then Craig Dale came up with a new scheme to build staff accommodation with government money. Only there was a catch. Craig Dale told the community they had to pay him up front and promised the state government would repay the money later. But then he disappeared.
There's that house that was never completed, never built. There's that other transportable that was never hooked up. And then there's the other two over here that weren't hooked up to service as well. Like a tropical roof.
Kenneth Rivers is the former chairman of the Warman board. He showed us a mess that Craig Dale left behind.
If Craig Dale was sitting here now, what would you say to him?
I probably wouldn't. Yeah, no, I wouldn't know what I'd say. Wouldn't probably say anything. I'd probably punch him.
You know, there are people... Lee Cleghorn had recently taken on the role of CEO when he made an awful discovery in the financial records.
Looking at the accounts that were going to come up at the end of the financial year, most of the assets were in the debtors ledger. There was the community was owed $3 million by 5-day holdings, and which was Craig Dale's company. The agreement that he made verbally was to pay the community back in blocks of $500,000 over a period, but none of those invoices were paid. So it's very real when you see it like this. It's hard to describe Really, it was disbelief. I still have a bit of trouble believing that a situation like that could occur, that it was a bad movie, almost like a satire about what could go wrong, a parody of how bad things can happen to good people. That's for $140,000 plus.
Craig Dale had swindled $2 million of Warman's own money and another $1 million in federal grants.
It was worse than broke. It was owing money back to the Commonwealth, and one person had walked away with money, and no matter what we did to try and get it back, there was a whole series of excuses, lies, bounce cheques.
He hoodwinked Warman. That's obvious.
Yes.
But does Warman bear some responsibility for what happened?
Certainly, and we've talked about that, and so do I. I was here at the very end of it, and yes, we do. But so do a lot of other people. I don't know who was in charge of him or overseeing him. Certainly wasn't Warman.
As chairman, Kenneth Rivers had to sign off on the accounts.
So how did he deceive you? I mean, tell me about signing some of those invoices.
I know my signature on a lot of them, and I can't even work out how that amount to get that amount. Just from, I think he just picked them right time when we vulnerable.
I got sad that we let it get this far, like we wasn't aware on, why wasn't we aware this guy is still taking all our money. This is our home. But we went for a drive yesterday and seeing the kids. Listening to Kenneth yesterday, and Lee. How could we let him go this far?
The loss of all that money means desperately needed services can no longer be delivered.
Well, I don't think anybody can afford $3 million to disappear, but what immediately meant in Warman was Commonwealth programs stopped straight away. There were really good programs just getting into place with a night patrol, which was really about keeping children off the streets and getting them home on time and at school in the morning. There's an aged care facility, for instance, that was built after the flood for, we're told, something like $7 or $10 million. It hasn't had a light switch turned on because there's no funding to do anything in it.
Wow, look at this.
This state-of-the-art aged care centre, built with the flood relief money, has never been opened because Warman can't afford to staff it or insure it.
Before this building got finished, we had about 8 of our residents from surrounding out communities that was ready to move into here.
Really?
But because of the funds, we just had to tell them to hold on.
Do the elders understand what's happened?
Yeah, they do, and as a community member, I see that they are angry inside and upset. They ask me every day when this building is going to be open.
And what do you say?
Well, I don't really have the answer.
After the devastation of the 2011 floods, a $900,000 flood warning system was put in place upstream, but they can't afford to turn it on.
After the flood, one of the things we didn't have was a warning sort of system in place, so anything to let us know the flood was coming. Basically, they said if we wanted to keep them operating, we'd have to pick up the cost of them, and I think they're like 80 grand a year to upkeep.
Why is it that you can't afford to operate it?
Oh, it's all to do with all that other stuff what we've been talking about, you know, what they hit, what the community took.
From Craig Dale?
Yep. I don't think he realised how close he came to nearly about shutting this place down, more or less.
Four Corners found Craig Dale living broke in a Bible college in Perth. It turns out he's a serial con man who has ripped off many other people along the way.
Oh, Craig?
Hello.
G'day, how are you? Vincent Besser from Four Corners. Just like to ask you some questions about Warman. How is it that you stole that money from Warman?
Craig Dale had just had a particularly bad week. Only a day earlier, he had pleaded guilty to defrauding the Commonwealth Bank in a separate $490,000 scam.
Yes, Warman were taken in by someone that was extraordinarily clever, well, more than clever, that prepared to go to lengths with people in such a traumatic, poor, down position that Warman was. It's hard to describe somebody who would use people like that for some scheme for their own ends.
We thought, how could you do that to us? You know, we trusted you. We had faith in you. I just feel real sad. Not ashamed, but sad that this guy could just come in and blind us.
There's individuals, sadly, there is, who are trying to find loopholes in every system that we have across Australia. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander funding and organisations and contracts which are out there, this does happen. And it is something which I think there needs to be strong messages that when these crooks or these individual contractors or people get caught, there is heavy penalties which go with this.
There are thousands of Aboriginal organisations, often set up by volunteers, to do tough frontline community work. But over time, they've grown with billions of dollars in grants to close the gap between white and black Australia. The problem is that in remote places, sometimes the most senior leaders have little or no financial literacy, and they're easily exploited.
I find it quite interesting that things that we wouldn't accept in the wider Australian community, you wouldn't have people sitting on boards who have no financial or no business background and no corporate background or some governance training background, and yet that's what we did in Aboriginal groups. We do need to have people in there that actually learns the skills, know the skills of running corporations. You know, I don't expect people to walk in the door and run a $10 million, $50 million or $100 million company without some sort of experience, skill and knowledge in that.
These organisations, and many of them have been established without any government initiative. It's been, we need an organisation or we need a group that can deal with a particular issue that we face in our community. Over years, this has turned into multi-million-dollar organisations, and they need to be equipped, and governance needs to move with service.
We continue our journey across the border into the Northern Territory. We're travelling to Tennant Creek, 500 kilometres from Alice Springs. Here we found the tragic waste of millions of dollars that were set aside to alleviate Aboriginal poverty. Jalalakari Council Aboriginal Corporation has received millions of dollars in grants to address chronic overcrowding and third world living conditions. But locals say it's failing miserably.
I have family, there's up to 20 people living in a 4-bedroom house. So the crowdedness in the houses is what brings people down as well.
And what happens to a house when you've got a 4-bedroom house with 20 people living in it?
Well, they just get, you know, worse and worse taps just get leak water. Stoves, for example, my nephew's house, every time they cook something on the stove, they'd get tingles up their fingers, because obviously something live in the stove.
I was born in Tennant Creek and raised here, and the last time I can remember houses being built in Tennant Creek was probably around the 80s or 90s. That was the last time that we had new housing in this town. Since that time, the population of the town, and particularly the Indigenous people, has more than doubled.
When you look around the community, I don't think they've done a good job. There's an issue today. Overcrowding is, it's in a lot of families here in Tennant.
Ronald Plummer is an elder of the Warramungu people. He rents this house from Jalalakari, which is also meant to maintain it.
What's the most number of people you have here ever?
Well, sometimes we get up to 15.
Ronald's three-bedroom home is overflowing with children and grandchildren who love their sport.
Meldrum, Ronald Jr., Venus, Patrick.
And Kenneth.
Oh, I didn't see Kenneth, eh? Sorry, Kenneth, I didn't see you.
What's this room here? Can you show me?
That's the
boys'
room.
That's the boys' room?
Yep.
Can you show me?
This one here is the boys' room.
Come and show us. You be the guide. And so how many boys sleep in here at night?
Four.
Four?
Yeah, the bathroom.
Okay.
When you look at that, it's just leaking.
Yeah.
Look at the water on the floor.
It's always wet like this, is it?
Yeah. They came here, fixed it, and it's still the same situation, it is, yeah. And like I said, I've got grandchildren running around. Anyone, one of them would have slipped over and serious injuries, like break an arm or a leg.
He says his house hasn't been repaired for at least a decade.
If you have a look at the tiles, that hasn't been changed for a
long time.
Yeah, a long time when you look at it.
It's the kind of overcrowding that's contributing to major social problems in Tennant Creek.
So, what is that? Pressure, and it starts at home and, people take it out on the streets.
What goes through your mind when you look at Venus and your other beautiful grandchildren?
Oh, where they're going to be if a problem like this not going to be solved. What I'm going to, when she's about 20 years old, we're still going to have the same problem.
Jalalakari has also been responsible for maintaining the houses at Aboriginal homelands around Tennant Creek. Traditional owner Norman Frank has invited us to his homeland. It's on Warramungu country.
This country belonged to woman Raymond and Spinifex wax and white cockatoo. It was our father's country. So it's so special to us, and through our ceremonies and through our totems, it's so special.
Thanks for inviting us in.
No worries, mate.
13 years ago, one of the homes here burned down. Jalalakari promised to rebuild it and dropped off the materials it needed to do just that. 11 years later, those steel frames are still sitting here.
This is what they left behind. Still here today.
When did they drop this here?
2004, 5.
This has been here since 2004, 5?
Yeah.
More than 10 years sitting here?
Sitting here like that, mate. Sitting here, just a frame.
Norman's family will wait as long as it takes for their house to be rebuilt.
This spot means a lot to us here. And for our kids to grow up and see our country and to learn about country, it's better to be out here in the country to see. And instead of learning from town, at least they're out here in a home.
Incredibly, while people here live in abject poverty, Jalalakari has given back to the government millions of dollars in grants it just never used.
The impact is that community misses out on core services such as youth funding, juvenile diversion. There were housing repairs and maintenance funds from that budget, which could have been spent on a whole range of things within town camps. those funds all went back to government. Where does that leave our community when we have that amount of funding designated for this region going back to consolidated funds?
I just cry out when I see people living in poverty and destitute in situations, and yet they've got, trust funds, they've got Aboriginal corporations that have multi-millions of dollars there that's supposed to be there for their own benefit, and it's not reaching the ground and helping them.
Scattered around Tennant Creek are symbols of the shocking waste.
They were just brought here and just plopped.
9 of these demountables were shipped over from China in 2010 for accommodation.
Because apparently they were bought and they're not compliant to Australian standards.
Gee.
So they've just been left standing here.
And how much money did Jalara? They cost $2 million, but 6 years they've sat empty.
These structures, we call them, ugly structures that were just plonked in their town living areas, the town camps, and just sat there. To this day, I don't know how many years later, they're still sitting there.
These would have been fantastic resources for community people here in town. Fortunately, the corporation has been unable to get sewage and water connected to those facilities. I would have thought a building company that had the experience of over 20 years in this industry would have planned for those resources before those buildings were installed.
For the past 9 years, Jalalakari's own auditor has said the organisation has not been in control of its business income. Some of that income is from this petrol station, which Richard Dodd co-owns with Jalalakari.
Piece back in the right way.
He told us that after a disagreement, Jalalakari decided to spurn its own business and spend $100,000 a year elsewhere to refuel its vehicles.
Well, it's a bizarre decision because they 50% own this company and 50% of the dividends of this company go directly to Jalalakari. They took their business away from us to an organisation that, for one, had no Aboriginal employment strategy and no Aboriginals employed.
It's this kind of management that has led to Jalalakari losing almost all of its core government contracts and becoming the subject of a federal government investigation.
Now, I've seen in my service station young 3-year-olds coming into the service station naked, half naked, with parents who are under the influence of alcohol, I'll put it that way. And I think, what chance has this kid got compared with a child of mine or a child living in suburban Melbourne or Sydney? And it's those sorts of things that really tear me up to see that sort of situation and realise that these kids have got nothing going for them. So I'd like, and I believe that our organisation could have made a difference. Sorry.
Jalalakari is run by former public servant Pat Brahm, who's been the CEO for the past 10 years. Members of her family also hold senior positions. We repeatedly tried to get an interview with Pat Brahm, but had no success. So we thought we'd pay her a visit at home.
Hello? Hello there. Is that Eric?
Yeah, what do you want?
No, just looking for Pat.
Yeah, she's not here.
Whereabouts could we find her?
Doesn't matter. Oh, she's not here.
Pat's husband, Eric, is also a Jalalakari employee.
Will you let her know that we just want to give her a fair shake, that's all?
Well, someone rang her, so she should know.
Is she going to be back in the morning, or...?
I'm not saying nothing.
Can I leave you my card?
No, I don't want it.
Okay, she doesn't want to talk to Four Corners.
That's right. Haven't you got the message?
God, no, she hasn't told me anything.
No, she doesn't want to talk to you. All right.
Pat Brahm later sent us a statement saying while Jalalakari is not a perfect organisation, it works hard for the most disadvantaged people in the region.
We need some more help. And we're saying, taxpayers' money is being wasted here, Surely that's government, work with us to sort it out.
thank you very much to Sacred Heart for coming.
Billions of taxpayer dollars have been spent to improve the lives of Indigenous people in Australia, but not enough of that money has reached them. On our journey, we've met formidable Aboriginal leaders doing their utmost for their people. But without better support to manage the money, these communities will continue to suffer.
There's certainly people that will prey on certain situations or environments. You know, there are weasels out there that just know what to look for and can infiltrate, and you've got to make sure that you're looking forward but watching your back as well.
What we've got to be doing is how do we now deal with the immediate issues to ensure that there's proper action in regard to transgressions, and there's proper training and proper education going in, and how do we look at developing people within those communities to build up that skill base.
Every cent that is put to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs needs to be finding its way to get the best outcome, and majority of the funds should be in the front line to deal with the issues and to work with empowering communities to be able to plan for their future as well as deal with the immediate. So every time there is fraud or every time there is, misappropriation of funds, it impacts families' lives.
I think right across Australia, Aboriginal people are given the power to be able to manage their own affairs, but we also need to be in place that we are strong enough and have the foundation to be able to manage our organisation effectively without these things occurring.
One of the tragedies of tonight's programme is that Four Corners has investigated failures and betrayals in the management of Indigenous communities many times over decades. Is it a vain hope that we will not be returning to tell this story again? There are some statements from the individuals and agencies featured in the programme on our website. Next week,